The lock on my apartment door had 3 settings: stuck, stuck worse, and open if you hit it with your shoulder at exactly the right angle, which is how I knew, at 11:41 on a Tuesday night, that the knock I heard wasn't Milo forgetting his key again. Milo would have hammered. This was one knock. Measured, waiting for permission it didn't need. I stood in my kitchen with a dish towel in one hand and my heart doing something violent behind my ribs, because I knew that knock the way you know a voice you've been listening for without admitting it. Bergamot came first, then cold slate, the smell of rain on stone that had no business being in a third-floor hallway that smelled permanently of somebody else's fried onions. Veil Eshkam did not come to my building. Veil Eshkam did not come anywhere she hadn't already conquered. To understand why the chair of the largest scholarship endowment in the state was standing outside a door that stuck, I have to go back 3 weeks, to the morning I found out I had 48 hours to prove I wasn't a thief. My name is Wren Sutter. I was 24, a senior finishing an accounting degree I'd been paying for one scholarship renewal at a time since my parents died on a stretch of icy interstate when I was 19, and I had a 10-year-old brother named Milo who needed an inhaler that cost $68 a refill, and a body that kept forgetting how to breathe on its own schedule instead of mine. I worked the register at Maggie's Diner from 6 to midnight most nights, closing out the till in my head before Priya finished counting it by hand, because numbers had always made more sense to me than people. People lied. Numbers, when you knew how to read them, never did. The morning it started, I was standing in the financial aid office holding a manila folder someone had left open on the counter just long enough for me to read the word discrepancy upside down and recognize my own last name underneath it. Britt Calloway saw my face and smiled the way she always smiled at me, like I was a stain she'd noticed on someone else's shirt. "Careful," she said, not lowering her voice, because lowering her voice would have wasted the audience. Charity cases who get greedy usually end up back where they started. 3 girls behind her laughed. I didn't. I had learned in 5 years of being the poorest person in every room I sat in that laughing back cost more than it bought. I picked up my coffee, and she bumped my elbow on her way past, not by accident, and it went down the front of my one good blazer in a long brown ribbon that was going to smell like burnt bean water for the rest of the day. "Oops," Britt said. I didn't answer her. I was already reading the second page of that folder, the one with the numbers on it, because underneath the humiliation, my brain had already started doing the thing it did best, the thing nobody had ever paid me to do, and nobody had ever thanked me for. $62,400, disbursed to a Wren R. Sutter, according to the ledger. I had never seen 40,000 of that money in my life. By 1 o'clock, I had a letter in my bag summoning me to an emergency review before the Ashcombe Foundation Scholarship Committee at 9 the next morning, my funding frozen effective immediately. My name flagged for financial irregularities pending investigation. 48 hours, the letter said, though it took me exactly 9 of them to understand what that really meant. Prove I hadn't stolen from the fund that was the only thing standing between Milo and a hospital bill I couldn't pay, or lose everything by Thursday. I sat in my car in the parking garage with my hands shaking too hard to hold my phone and did the only thing that had ever steadied me. I opened the ledger app I kept for the diner, the one nobody asked me to build, and I started reconciling 5 years of my own disbursements against the number in that folder, line by line. The way my father used to reconcile his register at the hardware store with an ancient adding machine that clacked like a typewriter and left a paper trail a foot long. He'd given me that calculator before he died. I still had it, cracked screen and all, in the bottom of my bag, because some things you keep even when they stop being useful, especially then. By midnight, I had found 4 names on that disbursement sheet that didn't correspond to any student enrolled at the university, and a routing pattern that sent money out one door and back in through another, with my name stapled to both. I did not sleep. At 8:57 the next morning, I walked into a conference room on the 9th floor of Ashcombe Hall with my chin up and my knees not, and found 6 committee members waiting behind a table and a man at the head of it with a mouth like he was already tasting my ruin. Desmond Price, vice chair of the foundation, had a voice built for boardrooms and a way of looking at me like I was a line item he was about to strike through. "Miss Sutter." He didn't stand. "You understand the seriousness of what's alleged here. I understand the seriousness of what's wrong," I said. "Those aren't the same accusation." Someone at the far end of the table made a small, disbelieving sound. Price's smile thinned by exactly 1 degree. "Explain." So I did. I laid my father's calculator on the table like a weapon, because it was one, and I walked 6 strangers through 5 years of my own financial aid disbursements against the fabricated sheet, and I named the 4 ghost recipients, and I showed them the account number that received the overflow, digit by digit, until the room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with me anymore. That was when the door at the back of the room opened, and the temperature changed before anyone said a word. She didn't announce herself. She didn't have to. Every spine at that table straightened half an inch, including Price's, and the smell that came in with her was cold stone after rain, bergamot cut with something sharper underneath, the kind of scent that made a room recalculate its own volume. Vale Ashcombe was 34 years old and carried the entire foundation her mother built like it weighed nothing, which was its own kind of lie. "Continue," she said, to me, not to the room, and took the seat at the head of the table that had somehow always belonged to her and never to Price. I continued. I finished the trail. When I set the calculator down at the end, my hands had stopped shaking, and the room was silent enough that I heard Price's pen stop clicking. "That's a serious allegation to level against this committee's own processes," he said. "It's not an allegation," Vale said. "It's arithmetic. Miss Sutter's file is suspended, not closed. Her funding is reinstated pending my personal review, effective now." She looked at me for the first time since she'd walked in, and something in her expression I couldn't name yet moved across it, and was gone. "You'll report to my office at 4. Price's jaw did something ugly and controlled. "Vale, Chair Ashcombe," she corrected, mild as frost, "and I'd like the full disbursement ledger for the last 3 fiscal years on my desk by noon. Desmond, all of it." I walked out of that room a full hour later than I'd expected, with my funding intact and a folded card in my pocket with an address embossed on it in letters so understated they had to be expensive, and I did not know yet that I had just crossed the threshold of something I would never be able to walk back out of the same person. Ashcombe Hall was not what I expected, though I hadn't known what to expect beyond marble and money. It was marble, and it was money. Floors that reflected the ceiling and a staircase that curved up 3 stories like it had never once considered a straight line. But it was also cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Portraits watched me from the walls, women with Vale's exact jaw and none of her eyes. Mrs. Ojo, the housekeeper, a soft-spoken woman with silver locks and a way of looking at me like she already knew something I didn't, walked me up. "Mind the 3rd stair," she said. "It catches." I minded it. I still caught my heel on the 4th one, and a hand closed around my elbow before I fully understood I was falling, steady and sure and gone the second I found my footing again, leaving behind a warmth on my skin that had nothing to do with the marble's chill. "You work too fast for your own feet," Vale said. "I work fine. Your stairs have opinions." The corner of her mouth moved. It wasn't a smile. It was the ancestor of one. They do. My mother had them left that way on purpose. She said a house should never let you get too comfortable in it. I filed that away without understanding yet how much it would matter. Her office took up half the third floor, a wall of glass looking down over a city I'd only ever seen from bus windows, and on her desk, beside a stack of files with my name on the top folder, sat a takeout container from Maggie's Diner. Grilled cheese, no tomato, the way I always ordered it because it was the cheapest thing on the menu that still felt like a decision. I didn't order that, I said carefully. I did. She didn't look up from the folder. You hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. It was in your file. My eating habits aren't in a financial aid file. They're in the notes my assistant took when he called the diner to verify your work schedule for the investigation. A pause, precise as everything else about her. I told him to order you something first. I didn't know what to do with that, so I sat down across from her and said nothing, and she watched me for a moment longer than the silence needed. Here is what happens now, she said. You'll work under my direct review for the remainder of the semester, auditing foundation disbursements alongside my staff. It satisfies the probation the board will insist on, and it means no one touches your file again without going through me first. Her eyes came up, gray as the slate note in her own scent. You are not a rounding error, Miss Sutter. Whatever Desmond Price wants the board to believe, I intend to prove otherwise. Why? Because the arithmetic doesn't lie, and neither, apparently, do you. She closed the folder. 4 o'clock, starting tomorrow. Don't be late. The stairs won't forgive you twice. I left Ashcombe Hall with a grilled cheese growing cold in my bag because I couldn't eat it in front of her, and a scent under my collarbone I would spend the next 3 weeks trying to convince myself I hadn't started craving. The audit took me 9 days to understand, and would have taken anyone else 9 months. Numbers arranged themselves for me the way music must arrange itself for people who actually understood it, and by the end of the first week I had a spreadsheet that made my stomach drop every time I opened it. 41 ghost names threaded through 3 years of disbursements, all of them routing, eventually through a shell account with Desmond Price's late mother's maiden name on the paperwork. I told Mo Reyes first, because he was the one who caught me still working at 9 at night in the little audit office they'd given me, arms crossed, unimpressed with my existence in the way of a man who had decided long ago that anyone new around Vale was a threat until proven otherwise. You should go home, he said. Whatever this is, it'll still be broken tomorrow. It's 41 names, Mo. It's not going to fix itself by tomorrow. It's going to get worse. He looked at the screen over my shoulder, and I watched something shift behind his face, the particular quiet of a man recalculating a person's worth in real time. Does she know? Not all of it. Not yet. Tell her tonight. He said it like an order and a kindness at once. Not tomorrow. Tonight. I found Vale still at her desk at 10, jacket off, sleeves rolled, going through the same disbursement sheets from a different angle, and when I set my laptop in front of her and walked her through what I'd found, I watched 34 years of careful control come apart in her jaw, one muscle at a time. He's been doing this since before I took the chair, she said finally. Since your mother had it. Something crossed her face that I didn't have a name for yet, grief wearing the mask of anger, because anger was easier to be seen wearing. My mother would have called this efficient, she said. She believed sentiment was a liability. She disowned my sister for loving the wrong kind of woman and called it protecting the family's future. I have spent 12 years running this foundation exactly the way she taught me, and I am only now understanding that Desmond learned the same lesson. Take what you can. Feel nothing while you do it. You don't feel nothing. I said, before I could stop myself. She looked at me for a long moment, the office quiet enough that I heard the elevator 2 floors down. No, she said. Apparently, I don't. We didn't have proof yet strong enough to move on price without him burying it first, so we agreed that night to build the case in silence, just the 2 of us and Mo. And somewhere in the 3 weeks after that, silence became the thing I looked forward to most in a day. The crisis came on a Thursday, the way crises do, indifferent to how prepared you think you are. Milo's asthma turned on him at 2 in the morning. A bad one. The kind where his lips went the wrong color, and I had to carry him down 3 flights because the elevator in our building had been broken since April. I called an ambulance I couldn't afford and sat in a waiting room doing math I hated. Insurance math, inhaler math, the kind that didn't care that my brother was 10 years old and scared. I don't know how Vale found out. I never asked, not really. Though I suspected Priya, who had my emergency contacts memorized better than I did. What I know is that at 4 in the morning she walked into that waiting room in a coat thrown over pajama silk, scent of cold slate and bergamot cutting straight through antiseptic and fear, and sat down beside me without asking permission, which was the first time I'd ever seen her ask nothing of anyone. "You should have called me," she said. "I didn't want, I stopped. You're not obligated to my life falling apart at 4 in the morning. I am not obligated to anything." She agreed. "I chose to be here. Those aren't the same thing, either." She reached over and took my hand, and I let her, because I was too tired to keep pretending I didn't want to. "Ask me with your words if you want me to stay." "Stay," I said, and my voice broke on the one syllable in a way 5 years of exhaustion hadn't managed. She stayed. She stayed through the discharge papers, through the pharmacy that didn't open until 8, through the moment I finally cried in a hospital corridor because I'd been holding it since I was 19 and it had nowhere left to go. She didn't tell me it was going to be fine. She just didn't leave. By the time Milo was sleeping in a bed in the east wing of Ashcombe Hall that afternoon, in a guest room with a working elevator and a nebulizer machine Vale had delivered by courier before 9 a.m., I understood I had stopped being able to pretend this was only about an audit. "You didn't have to do this," I said, standing in the doorway watching my brother sleep in sheets that cost more than my monthly rent. "I know." Vale stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of her, close enough that the cold slate note in her scent had softened into something I hadn't smelled from her before. Something almost like relief. I wanted to. "Why?" "Because you asked me a question in my office 3 weeks ago, and I've been building an answer to it ever since instead of saying it out loud." She turned to face me fully. "I keep thinking about a hallway with a door that doesn't lock properly, and how much it would cost me nothing at all to fix it, and how I have not offered, because I am afraid of what it means that I want to." "What does it mean?" "That I would like to be the kind of person who knocks," she said, "instead of the kind who assumes she's owed entry." I laughed, wet and startled, and she almost smiled, and for one suspended second in a hallway smelling of antiseptic and cold stone and warm linen, I let myself believe this could be simple. It wasn't, not yet, but that night, after Milo's fever finally broke and Mrs. Ojo had settled him with a story about the third stairs opinions, Vale and I sat in her kitchen at midnight, and she told me the rest of it. "My mother built this foundation to control people," she said, turning a mug in her hands without drinking from it. She called it philanthropy. It was a leash with a scholarship attached. When my sister Imogen fell in love with an Omega chef named Dahlia, my mother cut her off within a week and told me love was the one ledger you could never balance, so the wise thing was never to open the account. She looked up. I believed her for a very long time. "What changed?" "You did." She said it simply, The way she said everything, precise and unadorned. You walked into a room full of people who'd already decided what you were worth, and you proved the arithmetic wrong in front of all of them. I have spent my whole life being told that softness loses. You are the most exacting person I have ever met, and you are also the softest, and I don't know how to reconcile those two things, except that maybe I've been solving for the wrong variable. That's the least romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, I said, and somehow it's the best. She laughed, actually laughed, low and surprised at her own sound, and when she reached across the table and traced the line of my jaw with 2 fingers, I turned into the touch before I decided to. "Tell me to stop," she said quietly, "and I will." "Don't," I said, and this time when she kissed me, it tasted like the answer to a question I'd stopped believing anyone would ask. We stayed like that until the mug went cold, trading small things the way people do when the big things have finally been said. I told her about my mother's lemon cake, the one I'd never written down because I never thought I'd need to. The recipe existing now only in fragments, a smell of zest and butter I could summon but not reproduce. She listened like it mattered, which it did, though I didn't understand how much until much later. Her phone rang at 12:41. She almost didn't answer it. When she did, I watched her face go from warm to winter in under 4 seconds, and I knew, before she said a word, that whatever piece we'd bought that night had just run out. "He's called an emergency board session," she said, setting the phone down like it had burned her. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., full disclosure vote on the audit findings." A muscle moved in her jaw. "And he's filed a counter-complaint. Against you. Academic fraud. Falsified work-study hours." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something in them that looked almost like fear. "He's not defending himself, Wren. He's trying to bury you before you can bury him." The board session was not an audit review. It was an execution dressed as due process, and Desmond Price had built the gallows out of my own paperwork. He stood at the head of the table with copies of falsified timesheets bearing a signature that was almost mine, close enough to pass if no one looked twice, and by the time he finished speaking. 3 of the 6 committee members were looking at me like Britt Calloway had looked at me 3 weeks earlier, like a stain someone had finally gotten permission to point at. "The foundation cannot be seen to shield a fraud investigation with a personal relationship," Price said, and let that word, personal, sit in the room like something spilled. Chair Ashcombe recused herself from every prior review involving Miss Sutter's benefactor status. "I move that recusal be made permanent, effective immediately, pending a full independent inquiry into both the original discrepancy and the chair's judgment in handling it." "Seconded," said a board member I didn't know, and the vote that followed stripped veil of oversight on my case by a margin of 4-2, and with it went the only shield standing between me and a formal fraud referral to the university. I was escorted out of Ashcombe Hall by a security officer who wouldn't meet my eyes, my scholarship suspended pending inquiry, my access to the audit files revoked, my name now attached, publicly, to a fraud complaint that would follow me into every job application for the rest of my life if it wasn't undone. Vale didn't stop them. She couldn't, not without confirming exactly the accusation Price had built. I stood on the sidewalk outside Ashcombe Hall at 2 in the afternoon, with everything I owned still inside a guest room 3 floors up, watching a door that had, for 3 weeks, felt like the first safe thing in 5 years, close without a single person on the other side of it saying my name. I went home. The lock still stuck. I hit it with my shoulder twice before it gave, and I stood in my kitchen and started packing. Because if I was going to lose everything, I was at least going to be the one who decided when I left. That was where the knock found me, at 11:41 that night, and this time I understood, before I'd even opened the door, exactly what it meant. I didn't move for a full 10 seconds, bergamot and cold slate, unmistakable through a door that had never once kept a smell out properly, and under it something else, something like exhaustion held together by will alone. I opened the door. Vale stood in the hallway without her coat, without the careful architecture she wore, like armor, hair loose, eyes red-rimmed in a way I had never seen and would never see again. "They stripped my oversight," she said. "They can't stop me from being here as myself. You could lose everything for this. I already lost the version of myself that would have let you walk out that door without saying a word." She held up a folder, thin, and I recognized Mo's handwriting on the tab. "It's not enough yet. But it's the account number. The real one, full transfer history, going back to my mother's tenure." He didn't cover his tracks as well as he thought, because he never believed anyone would look hard enough to find them. "Why didn't you bring this to the board?" "Because I trust exactly 2 people to build a case that survives Desmond Price's lawyers," she said, "and one of them is standing in this doorway, and I am done letting anyone decide for us that we don't get to be in the same room." I let her in. The lock stuck behind us, and neither of us fixed it that night, because we were too busy at my kitchen table with her folder and my father's calculator, building the case that would end him properly instead of quietly. We worked until 4 in the morning and found the last piece an hour before dawn, a wire transfer, 11 years old, routed through the same shell account, signed off not by Desmond Price alone, but countersigned, under duress or complicity nobody could yet prove, by Vale's own mother, 6 months before she died. "She knew," Vale said very quietly, staring at the signature. "She knew," I agreed, "and he's been using that knowledge to keep you quiet for 12 years without you even realizing it was leverage." Something settled in Vale's face then, grief and fury, and something that looked almost like relief at finally understanding the shape of the thing that had been strangling her. "Then we don't just end his career," she said. "We end the leash." We took it to the full board 4 days later, not Price's board, not a room he controlled, but an emergency session Vale called herself, with Mo running security on the doors and a certified forensic auditor from outside the foundation standing beside me to confirm every figure I put on the screen, because Vale had learned, watching me work, that the arithmetic needed no defender but itself. Only a witness willing to say it out loud in a room too frightened to hear it. I stood at the front of that room at 9 sharp and did not shake. I laid out 41 ghost names, 11 years of transfers, 1 shell account, and 1 signature that connected Desmond Price to a decade of theft from students who would never know their scholarships had been quietly hollowed out beneath them. Price's face went the color of old paper. "This is a fabrication built by a woman under active fraud investigation, and a chair with a personal interest in discrediting me. The fraud investigation," Vale said, standing, "is closed as of this morning, with Miss Sutter fully exonerated and the falsified timesheets traced to a signature analysis matching your own assistant's handwriting, not hers. You have 30 seconds to explain the countersignature on this transfer before I hand this file to the district attorney's office instead of this board." He didn't have 30 seconds worth of anything true to say. Security had him out of the building before 10. By that afternoon, the story was already moving through the university the way stories do, and I stood in the financial aid office 3 days later, the same one where Britt Calloway had once smiled at me like I was something to scrape off a shoe, and watched her file into a mandatory academic integrity hearing of her own, because it turned out the fastest way to defraud a scholarship fund with your uncle's help was also the fastest way to have every one of your own falsified credits discovered once someone finally thought to check. She didn't smile at me on her way out. I let that be enough. That evening, Vale found me on the fourth stair, the one that caught, and this time, when I stumbled, she didn't just catch my elbow. She pulled me the rest of the way up, into her, and held on. "I have something to ask you," she said, "and I need you to say the word if the answer is no, because I have spent my whole life being told love is the one ledger you never open, and I would like, for the first time, to open it with someone who'll tell me honestly if the numbers don't work." "Ask me," I said. "Stay," she said, "not as an audit, not as probation, as the person I knock for instead of the person I command entry from. Tell me to stop, and I will." "But I don't want to stop." "Then don't," I said. And when her mouth found the curve of my throat where scent gathers thickest, when her teeth grazed the place a bond mark would go and stopped, waiting, I felt the question in it as clearly as if she'd spoken. "Yes," I said. "Ask me with your words, if you need to hear it twice." Wren Sutter. "May I?" "Yes," I said again, and the bite that followed was gentle enough to be a promise, and sure enough to be a claim, and the room filled, for one long moment, with the smell of honeyed fig gone warm as struck match, bergamot gone soft as banked fire, two signatures resolving, at last, into one entry that would never need reconciling again. A year later, the lock on my old apartment door didn't matter anymore, because I didn't live behind it, though Vale had it fixed anyway, the week after everything, quietly, the way she did most kindnesses, and gave the key to the next tenant instead of throwing it away, because she said a working door should always go to somebody who needs one. Desmond Price was serving 4 years for fraud and 2 counts of falsifying federal financial aid records, his name struck from every plaque in Ashcombe Hall within a month of his sentencing. Britt Calloway lost her degree eligibility for a full year and, last I heard, was working retail in a town 2 hours from campus, which some days I let myself feel sorry about, and most days I didn't. Vale's mother's name stayed on the building. Vale had the wording under it changed, quietly, to read only as history, not as honor, which felt like the right kind of ledger to close. Imogen came back for the wedding. I hadn't known, until Vale told me with her voice unsteady, in a way I'd only heard once before, in a hospital corridor at 4 a.m, that she'd written to her sister the week after Price's arrest, an apology 12 years overdue, and that Imogen had written back within a day. She walked into Ashcombe Hall on my wedding morning with a woman named Dahlia on her arm and cried harder than anyone else in the room when Vale said her vows, short and exact, the way she said everything true. "I will not mistake control for love again. I choose you, on purpose. Every day the sun comes up on this house." Mo gave a toast that made the whole room laugh and then made half of it cry, about the woman he'd never once seen wait for anyone, standing in a doorway at 4 a.m, refusing to leave. He handed me a small wrapped box afterward that turned out to hold my father's calculator, cracked screen replaced, casing restored. An inscription on the back I hadn't asked for and will never stop being grateful someone thought to give me. Not a rounding error, never was. Milo turned 11 that spring, ran the length of Ashcombe Hall's garden without needing his inhaler once, and told anyone who'd listen that his sister had caught a thief with a calculator older than the thief's own crimes, which was, give or take, more or less true. And on a Tuesday morning that smelled like butter and lemon zest, Mrs. Ojo set a cake on the kitchen table that tasted as close as memory and careful reconstruction could make it, exactly like my mother's, because Vale had spent months tracking down a great-aunt 3 states over who remembered the recipe by heart, and had never once mentioned she was doing it until the day it was done. I stood at the window that morning with Vale's arms around me and the door standing open behind us, no lock, no stuck hinge, nothing left in that house that needed forcing, and watched the light come up gold over a garden that had once belonged to a woman who believed love was a liability, and now belonged to two women who had proven, in ink and arithmetic and every quiet knock since, that she had been wrong. We spend our lives being told what we're worth by people who never bothered to check the math. Sometimes the truth of a person isn't announced, it's tallied patiently by someone willing to look twice, and it turns out love, like any honest ledger, only ever balances when both sides are finally counted. The end.